background checking.
Yeah.
So here we go. Good morning, friends. Good morning to friends in India and late good evening to friends from USA who have joined. So welcome back to Saturday Club of Baroda morning meeting. And today we have a very interesting topic and a very distinguished speaker with us, Dr. Bharat Desai, MD USA. He is a consultant primary care and internal medicine, Florida, USA. He did his MBBS from Baroda Medical College way back in 71 or 72 batch. So we are very proud of you that you are our alum. He did his residency in internal medicine and fellowship in pulmonary and critical care in Michigan, USA. To his credit, he has more than 4 decades of practice. He had held several important positions during last 4 decades. And he has a passion for a deeper science-driven exploration into human health, disease, and aging. And his mission is to promote evidence-based knowledge, challenge misconceptions, and empower long-term well-being. Now, as a part of his vision and mission, today we'll be having him talking about medical dogmas and nutritional myths, a call for paradigm shift. What a wonderful title you have given, Dr. Bharat Desai. We all look forward to a wonderful talk from you. And thank you once again for joining us. I know it's very late there in USA, 10:30 p.m., I believe. So thank you so much for joining. And the stage is yours. You have about 40 minutes to speak, and we'll keep 10-15 minutes for discussion. Thank you. Over to you.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Pandya, and thank you, everyone, for being here. Some of us late night, and you in India early morning, Saturday morning. But I'm truly honored to speak to such a distinguished guests and doctors, and from my medical alumni college. So my goal today is really to kind of get a conversation or discussion about some of these beliefs in medicine. And I want to present some data and perspective so that we can talk about what is wrong with that and what we can do. Now, some of these beliefs are so deeply entrenched that even questioning them would make one feel like an outcast, right? So, but as a scientist and clinician, our job is not to just protect dogma, but to really go for scientific truth. And sometimes that means challenging to the very foundation of what we have been taught and learned. And in that spirit, I want to conduct today's presentation. So before we diving into the specific example of these dogmas or beliefs, I want to present some broader context, because without that understanding the context, it will be difficult to accept these challenges, right? Because we have to know how these ideas were formed and why do they persist in spite of contradictory evidence. And unless you know the story behind that, it will be very hard to challenge this dogma. And it will be very difficult to accept or embrace new paradigm. So let's begin with what are the problems, why these dogmas? And number one is the quality of the medical science. And as let me just see. Oh, not moving.
Slide is not moving, it seems.
Yeah. Hold on. What do I do? Oh, it used to move before. Oh, there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see.
So what about the science? So science, as you can look at this quote from physicists, science is not a consensus. And history reminds that science is not static. It always evolves. but only when we are willing to question the consensus and challenge the long-held assumptions. And that's the spirit I want to bring this into discussion today. And what are the pitfalls of medical science? As you can see from this quote, our medical science is neither sacred nor immune to external influence. It is often shaped, sometimes profoundly, by human bias, ego, politics, power, and money. And as you can see from this quote, many leading figures have raised concern about integrity of medical research. And if the medical science is riddled with half-truth, then nutritional science is like a built on quicksand. It's really a scandal, as called by Stanford epidemiologist John Ioannidis. Because what happens is there is a complexity of food and human biology. It makes it nearly impossible to isolate effects of individual component of the food. And here we see every day studies come left and right. Oh, this, if you eat this, is going to get better. If you eat this, it's going to better. So it's, and most of them are nutritional they're observational studies, very few randomized control trials, and very difficult to do randomized control trials, because just imagine, it's hard to control diet even in normal people. So how do you control for years and years, right? So the science is flawed. And how did this belief survive decades? If the science is this bad, why does this dogma persist? So let's look at that. And that's a part of, there is a modern medicine. What is wrong with and we are all part of the modern medicine. We run on hierarchy. And most of the time, the guidelines, the priorities, and the research and policies come from the top. It's shaped by institution, committees, and influential voices, right? Whoever is a loud voice or whoever is a personality. Once a theory takes hold, like lipid hypothesis, it becomes a doctrine and it's just perpetuated and it's very difficult to challenge. And other problem with medicine is we treat biomarkers. We are biomarker-driven, symptomatic treatment. That's our goal. We never focus on the root cause of disease or the biological process. And perfect example is blood pressure, LDL, and blood sugar. These are not really diseases. These are the biomarkers. And the underlying process, why blood pressure goes up or why LDL goes up or why sugar goes up, either we know, but we are not focused on this and we don't treat it. And that is the problem with modern medicine. Because all those biomarkers suggest deeper metabolic dysfunction. And as a physicians, our thing is we cannot blame the doctors. Most of us really truly want to help, but sometimes we are hamstrung by policies, guidelines, like statins, right? You have to give it in diabetics, otherwise you will be malpractice. So, and we also train to follow guidelines, not question them. And we got almost no training in nutrition or biostatistics. I remember in our medical school days, we used to hate that biostatistic class. I mean, it was a boring, nobody wanted to go there. So we never had any proper training how to critically evaluate the research, right? So we depend on the pharmaceutical company reps to tell us, or expert panels or reviews or summaries, and they will tell you, okay, only thing we know is p-value here and there, but we have no idea how to critically evaluate the study. So naturally, if the leader or somebody is giving you wrong information, it's going to be perpetuated. So those are the three issues. And these are the reason you can look at it, the repetition, truth, illusions, and government and echoing effect, they all create this perpetual cycle. And the most glaring example for this perpetuation by repetition and illusion of truth is Ancel Keys diet-heart hypothesis. And this is the most important hypothesis where everything was built on this. And that was in 60s or this Ancel Keys, he was on Time magazine, I forgot, 1962, I think he was, okay. So everybody's probably familiar with his Ancel Keys. He's a physiologist from University of Minnesota, and he was determined to find the cause and the cure of rising rates of coronary disease in America after World War II. So he was convinced, from whatever reason, there was one other Russian study before, that Americans' diet high in meat and saturated fat was to blame. So he passionately promoted this hypothesis, which was known as diet hypothesis. But from the start, foundation was very sketchy. It was based on a single, or what you call most infamous 7-country studies, if you're familiar with that. So that was like he collected data for 22 countries and cherry-picked only 7 countries, which showed that the countries who had more intake of fat and saturated fat had heart disease. But they excluded France and Switzerland because they were eating a lot of saturated fat and their disease was low. So they call it French paradox. So despite this conclusive evidence, this hypothesis has gained tremendous traction and is still there today, right? And that, based on that hypothesis, it reshaped all the dietary guidelines, medical thinking, public policy, worldwide problems. Fear of saturated fat persists today. And so how did such a flawed, unproven idea become a gospel, right? Really. And this story follows patterns throughout the history, right? When charismatic figures like Ancel Keys, like Trump or Hitler, whatever, ascend by railing powerful enablers, suppressing dissent, and controlling the narrative in media. And that's exactly Ancel Keys did. He had alliances with Harvard, American Heart Association, and the media. So the investigative journalist Nina Teicholz has exposed this troubling chapter in Medical Science and Nutrition, reminding us that science is not immune to politics, ego, or industry influence. And that questioning dogma is not only healthy, but necessary. So this is, I don't know whether this is Nina. She has written multiple books. I think one of the big one, if you really want detail about saturated fat, look at, I think, Big Fat Surprise or something like that. It has every detail about it. She has talked to hundreds of scientists, and she knows every studies on nutrition and in detail. So as you can say, Disturbing Story of Nutrition, you can read it that the hypothesis was formed and then it was accepted as truth before it was proven. And then it was enshrined by this institution. And normally the science will eventually win, right? Normally there is a self-correcting mechanism of science. We should have prevented this. We should have ruled with skepticism and doubt, but this failed. And that's why we still have that hypothesis going on. And why this failed? So she has done 2 decades of investigating all this science, and she has an organization called Nutrition Coalition, where she's worked to bring higher quality evidence, especially around saturated fat, into USDA policy guidelines and discussion. And she has failed. Her efforts have largely been stalled. She cannot even get them to look at these studies which she presented to this policy board. So, I mean, it's so infuriating and frustrating that, that this is happening. And as you can see, all critics. So the Tim Noakes, that he's a professor in South Africa, Malhotra is in UK, and Gary Fetke is in Australia. They were all discredited sideline, and they were called statin deniers. And a lot of these dissenting researchers were excluded from conferences and policy discussion, and contradictory findings were ignored or buried and delayed for years. And I'll tell you about which one of the most important evidence which was buried for a long time. And actually, the Dr. Noakes was, his license was taken away. He was sued by none other than dietitian in South Africa. Dietitian board, whatever, they brought the suit. And it's unbelievable. He lost all his friends, his colleagues discredited him and everything. He almost, finally, he was exonerated about 5 years later. So this is the story of dissenters. And as you can see, the guidelines, USDA guideline 1977, and that's when we says fat is bad, right? And low fat, high carb diet, healthy carb, marked shift in public health. And as you can see, it sharply coincides with the rise in the obesity and type 2 diabetes and all related chronic diseases. And as you can see, these are the controversy and criticism of the guidelines. So much influence and bias. So now let's look at the main dogma, which is the lipid dogma. And that's what are these? So lipid-centric vision, that's what, and includes diet heart hypothesis. We talked about lipid hypothesis. I will tell you in detail. Seed oil, statins, and low-fat, high-carb diet. So let's go one by one. So we talked about this before, and this Minnesota coronary experiment, as I told you about, this is the study which was done in 1968 to 73. It was authored, actually, Anselke was also part of the author, was a principal, I think. And this was only one of this. I think you will never be able to repeat this kind of trial. It's one of the largest randomized control trial of its kinds, where saturated fat was replaced with omega-6 vegetable oil in 9,000 patients. It's impossible to get this many numbers now, right? And it was almost double blind because they were institutionalized patient, and they could really switch. One mess or one dining hall was this, they had saturated fat, one was this. So it's kind of double blind, but it's very hard to do those trials. And what was the result? There was no improvement in heart disease or mortality. And in fact, 30% drop, each 30% drop, 30 milligram per deciliter drop in cholesterol was linked to 22% increase in mortality. All right. And that is so when this was done in 1968-73. So what happened to this study? It was never published. This study was never published. And Anselke took out his name, and the Ramsedan is the first one is there. So I think it was, he put his data in his attic or something, and his grandson, I think so many years later, uncovered. And then the study came along, and then I think they looked at in 2016 British Medical Journal, kind of looked at all the data, and then they concluded that, that saturated fat had no higher risk on the coronary disease. And when the results came, before, I'm talking about in 1970, somebody asked, hey, what about this study really discredit this saturated fat hypothesis? And they said, well, I don't think so, and it's a surprise. We are disappointed in the result. That's what their argument. They asked about, we were disappointed because it did not prove their thesis, and that's why they buried it. So this guidance, pushed for decades by AHA, USDA, was adopted globally since 80. And as you can see, obesity, diabetes, cancer, dementia, everything related is going up and up, just parallel. So lipid hypothesis, so traditional lipid-centric model of atherosclerosis, we blame primary LDL. The LDL is too much, infiltrate arterial wall and form plaques, right? But this really does not take into consideration the role of endothelial dysfunction, inflammation, and thrombosis, and reverse cholesterol transport, where the cholesterol is cleared from arteries and returned to the liver. And that is now gaining more traction. And as you can see about our Virchow triad, right? Remember the inflammation, thrombosis, and a flow. And that paradigm still holds, but when the lipid-centric model took hold, everything went on the back burner. And all the research, most of the research was geared towards this. And very few researches were going for this other phenomenon, thrombosis, inflammation, oxidative stress. That's what we know now. Endothelial dysfunction is probably one of the primary driver. But so this Rader's research shows that HDL and reverse cholesterol transport is important. And Levy's and Cantos trial confirmed that inflammation is causal driver for atherosclerosis. So together, these findings shift the focus from LDL alone to more integrated understanding of lipid metabolism and inflammation in heart disease. So LDL, everybody thinks is bad cholesterol, but look at how important this molecule is and what are these very important functions. So LDL was found in the plaques, so they started blaming LDL. But LDL doesn't go there just because it's high number there. LDL goes there to really, it is responsive to the stress. So the job of the cholesterol or LDL is to really, when there is inflammation or injury, it goes there. And sometimes if the injury is overwhelming, it gets oxidized, so it gets sacrificed. And then the macrophages engulf there and becomes foam cells and the plaque starts. So really, it's not an arsonist, it's a firefighter. Okay. So if firefighters in the fires, if firefighter gets burned or died, then everybody, if somebody start blaming firefighter, that hey, that was because it was seen at the scene of the accident. So that's exactly the LDL, and it's been proven, right? This BMG meta-analysis in 2016 found no clear evidence between high LDL and coronary disease, especially in older adults. And now we also know that low LDL is linked to higher mortality, as shown in Framingham study, especially in elderly people, because it really works as works for immunity. So what happens is if you're low LDL and elderly people, they're going to more likely to die from infections because you lose that. And that has been shown. So LDL is a biomarker and not even a good one, but it's not a villain. And as you can see, this is from Framingham study. So LDL alone, if you look at it, is not a good predictor. If you combine with HDL, then it definitely helps. So if your HDL is high, it really doesn't matter how high your LDL is, still the risk is low. And there's also some nuance. Now we know the small dense particles, even HDL small, and LDL also is important. Oxidizes LDL is important. So these are some nuances, but I want to go in details of that. That's just to convey the message that LDL alone is not the whole story. And this is the women's study, again, Women's Health Initiative. And you can see the triglyceride has such a powerful predictor. Look at LDL. LDL is way down there. And insulin resistance is #1 predictor of this atherosclerosis. So it's so important, insulin resistant metabolic dysfunction. And the triglyceride is related to that. But LDL risk is very low, and then still we are focused so much on LDL. And this is the conclusion of recent study 2025. It says low LDLs are not always protective, especially in people with diabetes. So if you're diabetic and LDL is low, and if you're high triglyceride and low HDL, then actually your coronary risk goes up. So now comes to the seed oil, #3 in our agenda. So seed oils are vegetable oils, the corn, soybeans, all those industrial oils, and they are the most dangerous ingredients in the modern diet. The olive, avocado, and coconuts are not. Obviously, they are not from the seed, they are from the fruit part, right? And for decades, we have been told to fear saturated fat and replace it with vegetable oils, because they were deemed heart healthy because they lower LDL cholesterol. So lowering LDL must be good for the heart. So I mean, this mantra keep repeating and repeating and repeating. Just like President Reagan used to say, there you go again, And what if this widely accepted belief is dangerously wrong? Because that's precisely the reason the AHA and ADN, they're all promoting vegetable oil still. And this is the brief, we don't have time to go over all detail, but this is how the vegetable oils create havoc in the cells. And basically because of the double bonds in polyunsaturated fatty acid, they get oxidized or perioxidized and producing toxic products which damages mitochondria, their membrane, cell membrane, and DNA. So the energy production is decreased significantly. And there was one study that if you're high PUFA diet and if your fat is high PUFA, then your energy production is like almost 50-60% of what it should. So that's eventually drives insulin resistance, hyperglycemia, and a lot of different. And as you can see how this works. And this is the graph which compares, this is from 1900 till today, okay? And you can see there is a saturated fat, sugar, and then the non-communicable disease. And as you can see, everything they parallel. As the seed oil consumption goes up, all the diseases are going up. Exactly. So correlation is so strong, almost too perfect. It feels like it's being doctored, right? How in science you rarely have this kind of strong correlation, such a strong, powerful correlation. And it meets several Bradford Hills criteria. I'll tell you about it later, because these are observation studies, right? But if it meets a lot of criteria of Bradford Hill, then you can say that this correlation is not just a correlation, but it's a causation. Means seed oil could be causing this problem. And as you can look at the saturated fat, which is the green line, look at it's going down from 1900 till today. Look at it. And the diseases are going up. Now, how can you say, I mean, if any sensible person, how can you say that saturated fat is causing the problem and not a seed oil? Right? So how can we keep blaming and ignoring seed oils? And that comes to this, people in India may not know about, but this in here we know about the famous Central Park 5 case. If you remember, 5 black teenagers were convicted of brutal assault in 1989, despite flimsy evidence. But there was so much public hysteria, racial bias, media-driven fear, and everybody wanted to find the assailant. So they grabbed these guys, and their trial was so much tainted that fate was sealed. They were all put behind the bar. And as a side note, without being political, Donald Trump amplified this frenzy by he took major ads, full page in 5 newspapers, says that, oh, calling for death penalty, and these are the criminals, and they should be hanged, and stuff like that. But years later, I don't know how many, 30, 40 years later, DNA evidence proved their innocence, and they were exonerated, right? The same, why I'm telling you this, because it's identical. Saturated fat shares exactly similar story, very eerily similar. It was blamed for heart disease without a solid evidence. Instead, institutional bias and anti-meat ideology at that time, animal welfare and religion influence. Seventh-day Adventist was very strong influence in earlier nutritional guidelines in USA. And they are naturally vegetarian, they're against meat, and their influence was so strong. So because of all this, saturated fat was easy to blame. It became a scapegoat, right? Just like these black guys, oh, black guys, they must be criminal and put behind the bar. And so Central Park 5s were eventually freed based on DNA evidence, but saturated fat is still in jail. And we still wait the DNA moment. I hope we should get a DNA moment in medicine and nutrition where we can have a clear, irrefutable evidence that can overturn decades of this dogma. And as you can see again, this was is so sad. This data were done way before Ansel Keys. There was I think his name was West. He was a dentist from Cleveland. He went to all these population, Maasai in Africa, Inuits, Eskimos, and studied all over the Kitowans, and he studied a lot of population, and he determined that their rate of non-communicable disease was very, very low. As you can see, the PUFA, omega-6 PUFA, the last column, is minimal in all those. So Okinawans, Japanese Inuits is those Eskimos, and Maasai was Africa. Their diet was very high in saturated fat, and Kitawans were high in carbohydrate because they were like tubers and stuff. But all of them, the saturated, PUFA was very low, as you can see. And non-communicable disease is the black line, and you can see it was very, very low. Look at US and Israel. Israel has very high PUFA consumption, seed oil consumption in USA, and look at their NCD just jumped like a rocket. It took off like a rocket. I mean, what more evidence you need, right? And it's global pattern. I mean, you can examine one of the ophthalmologists, his name is Chris, I forgot his name, and he has studied everything globally, and same story everywhere. Seed oil consumption goes up and chronic disease goes up. And these were the trial I told you about. These are the major saturated fat trial, Minnesota coronary experiment. You see Sydney Heart showed 70% increase in mortality. Okay. An LA veteran study, which is usually cited by the lipid hypothesis proponent, because there was improvement in, there was some benefit, but the death rate was high. Higher cancer risk in LA veteran study, which was actually main study they based their guidelines was initially in 1970. Sorry, these are the Bradford's criteria, Hill's criteria for correlation to causation, and you can see the strength of association is strong, consistent evidence is strong, temporal sequence. So like population, when the seed oil consumption goes up, so that's called temporal sequence. And this is all strong. And look at with saturated fat and LDL is weak. Yet somehow we still blame saturated fat and LDL. This is advised by AHA and USDA. They still want you to reduce saturated fat to less than 6% of total calorie and replace with PUFA and MUFA. MUFA is okay, but PUFA is like one of, and they encourage to comprise 5 to 10% of the total calories as heart healthy diet. Now, based on what I have learned, you do not want more than 5% of PUFA. Actually, 2 to 5% is ideal if you can do it. So less the better. But that's what our institutions are telling us, and people are following it. Statins. Now, there's also always debate about statins, right? So there were a lot of failed attempts at showing cholesterol control reduced the coronary disease mortality for a long time. But in spite of that, they still say that it's miracle drugs, right? Robert says statins are to atherosclerosis what penicillin was to infectious disease. Now, I don't have exact quote or the person who did, but one of the cardiologists from American Heart or something way back, when they knew that, oh, fat is the problem, and now we have statins, reduce cholesterol, they said the coronary disease would be wiped out from this earth. That was many, many years ago. And look at it, it's going up, it's not even going down. And these are the major statin trials. And see, they are always, the top one is relative risk reduction. And that's what everybody's touting, including pharmaceutical companies. 30%, 50% reduction in mortality. Second is Jupiter trial, Crestor trial. You look at that it was like a miracle. They said, my God, there's 50% reduction in cardiovascular risk. But that is relative risk. If you look at absolute risk, real percentage wise, look at it, it's minuscule, it's less than 1% for Crestor. And the first one was 4S, that is simvastatin study. That was the first major trial. And that was before the Vioxx scandal, which exposed deep flaws in the trial transparency and fudging up the data. And even so, that shows 3.4, which sounds or looks significant, is better than others, but it's also misleading because it only looked at, that was 5-year trial compared to their Jupiter trial was stopped early because of spectacular benefit. So if you do annualized absolute risk reduction per year, the 4S is only 0.63%. And look at the percentage wise in this. So this is a risk reduction, negligible. So this is the Crestor study. You can look at why they come up with 50%, because statin had 99% and placebo had 98% risk, events. So 0.9, which is 50% of the 1.8 reduction. And that's how they come up with the hazard ratio. And so if the primary prevention, so if nobody has any heart issues, the statin absolutely has minuscule benefit. And most of the benefit comes from their pleiotropic anti-inflammatory effects, not from lowering LDL. And these are the hidden cost of statins. As we know, CoQ10 is a major one because CoQ10 and cholesterol in the same pathway and they get blocked. So mitochondrial ATP generation is affected significantly and create oxidative stress and all this vitamin K2, selenium, endothelial dysfunction, a lot of problem with this. And this has reflected in the increased incidence of type 2 diabetes, vascular calcification, and hypertension observed in patients treated with statins. And the mitochondrial impact is critical in high energy tissues, right? Which are the tissues require high energy? Brain, heart, and muscles. And that's why you see the effects in these tissues like myopathy, dementia, and cognitive disorders. So given this risk, the modest benefit of statin must be carefully weighed against their potential harms in individual cases. You cannot blanketly give statin to everybody. Other one is low-fat diet. And as you can see, because of anti-fat, the fat-phobic model created this frenzy about low-fat diet in 70s and 80s, and that inadvertently helped fuel the obesity epidemic and related disorder. So low carb, high fat keto diet, early pioneers, the Benting, Atkins, and Yudkin, they were all dismissed, ridiculed, or silenced. But they were simply ahead of their time. And Atkins, I looked at it, why some of the Atkins patients or whatever, he didn't have a trial, but some of the Atkins patient had a problem. And I think partly is because he didn't differentiate between what fat. So if you are on high fat diet of PUFA 6, then that's going to kill you, right? So that's going to be the problem. And this is the comparison. As you can see, it beats standard American diet anytime, low carb, high fat diet, except LDL, which is raises. But as we know now that that's not the villain, which was thought it to be. This is diet comparison of high carb, low fat, Mediterranean, and your keto diet, and still the low carb, high fat diet wins by all. Now, second paradigm is the dogma is metabolic misdirection, and that is the flawed paradigm in obesity, diabetes, and hypertension. So we think we're blaming calorie for obesity, right? Still. And for diabetes, we are so much focused on lowering glucose, we neglect insulin. And the third is hypertension, is like a solely focus on salt, but that's not the case. Hypertension is not only caused by salt. It's I'll show you what it's. So insulin resistant inflammation and metabolic dysfunction is responsible for all this obesity, diabetes, hypertension. They are all related. And if you treat insulin resistance or metabolic dysfunction, you're going to be able to reduce weight, control diabetes, and hypertension. So this is a calorie-centric model. WHO still thinks it's calorie in, calorie out, but that's repeatedly has failed for the last 50 years, right? So obesity is really a hormonal disorder. And actually, 1965, the Yalow and Berson, who developed the insulin assay, they knew it even at that time that releasing fat from adipose tissue and burning it requires only insulin deficiency. Means if your insulin is low, you're going to release fat and you're going to burn fat. And the best example is type 1 diabetes. They have no insulin, and look at, they are skinny. They can eat thousands of calories, but still they will not gain a pound. So it's disorders of fat accumulation driven by hormonal dysregulation, insulin resistant, leptin resistant, which is a hunger hormone, and hyperinsulinemia. And Gary Taubes is the one. This is also journalist, and it's shame that journalist has to not blow the whistle, but they are the one he has to kind of challenge this dogma. He did it for the obesity and diabetes and carbohydrates, and Nina did for the saturated fat. And according to this, hormonal dysfunction, insulin is cause and carbohydrate problem. So second is a glucose-centric model. And as you can see, if your focus is only control sugar without looking at the insulin, you're going to have a problem. And that's why the diabetics or whoever were treated with insulin had a bad outcome. And all these trials have shown that aggressively lowering glucose does not improve outcome, and sometimes it causes harm. And then the other one is salt-centric model, right? So the DASH trial, which is like the trial for everybody, says that that's the reason we should not eat salt, right? So it was designed not to uncover the cause of hypertension, but it was designed, it's a top-down effort. As I said again, somebody at the top decides this is the theory, this is what we believe, and let's test that and see if it works, rather than, hey, we know this is hypertension, let's see what are possible causes and let's evaluate each cause. And that was a problem. So they didn't go and look for what is causing hypertension. They said, oh, this low fat, low sodium. So that was a big dogma at the time. So see if that improves the blood pressure. And what did it show? Is reduction was only, I'll show you, I think I have it in, like a 5 millimeter mercury or something like that. And they only tried for 30 days. While the ketogenic trial, this Virta Health, reduction of 11 millimeter at 2 years. And as you can see, if it is very low salt diet, you're going to have an increased cardiovascular risk and other problem. 3 to 5 to 3 to 6 milligram, gram per day is good. So insulin resistant hypertension, how does insulin resistant or insulin causes hypertension? These are the 4 very known. The RAS system it activates, sympathetic nervous, vascular smooth muscle growth, and impairs insulin signaling cascade. And that insulin cascade has nitrous oxide production, which is a potent vasodilator. So if you remember nothing else, remember this. Final 5 key takeaways. Avoid seed oils and refined carbs. They are the most harmful ingredients in modern diets. Don't fear saturated fat. Even low saturated fat could be harmful because then you will not have those fat-soluble vitamins and other benefits of saturated fat. Animal foods and salt are not the enemy. And stop obsessing over LDL. Instead, focus on insulin-resistant metabolic health. And eat real food. Avoid ultra-processed food, which is loaded with refined carbs and seed oils. What's the future holds? Well, what history tells us is this, that challenging the status quo is a long, arduous journey. Whether it was tobacco, trans fat, or lead in gasoline, it took forever. Truth doesn't win easily. Class action lawsuits won't work here because all these processed food, seed oil, statins were all backed by medical institutions and government authorities. So you cannot sue them. So change has to come from down, ground up, not from top. And so what you can do here is what you can do: stay informed, critically evaluate evidence, support pioneers and influencers sharing truthful evidence-based messages, back non-profit acting in the public's best interest, and be politically and professionally active to help shift the policy and leadership. Most importantly, implement what you learn in your practice with your patients and among friends and family. In closing, as a physician, our duty is not to tradition or consensus, but to our patients and the truth. It's time to move beyond outdated dogmas and toward a paradigm that prioritizes evidence over ideology and prevention over management. Change begins the moment we ask, what if we were wrong? I hope today's talk has given you enough ammunition or thoughts to challenge or think about, critically evaluate these outdated dogmas, and the confidence to embrace a much needed paradigm shift. Because unless you are convinced, you cannot inspire others, and real change begins one person at a time. And thank you all for your attention. I know it was quick, and because of short time, I could not go into a lot of details, but these were the crux of my, and I don't know the time-wise, Dr. Pandya.
Yeah, you are absolutely on the dot time because we do keep time for some discussion. And you can
good.
stop the sharing of the screen now. So we
Okay.
can see all faces and we can have some discussion.
All right.
Just stop the screen sharing. On the top of your screen, you will see stop screen sharing button.
Oh, I want to stop. Okay.
Yeah, so
Where
that
do
we
I
can
see
have
all
more faces on the screen.
Hold on, I got to, let me. Stop screen sharing.
So anyway, Dr. Bharat, it was a wonderful talk. And I am sure you have given enough ammunition, not only for one to introspect, but for the whole audience here to participate in the discussion. So I invite comments, questions, because whenever we have some discussion on nutrition, there is always a good debate. I mean, reflected in our group also, in WhatsApp group also, we
Right.
a lot of messages on this, that there
Exactly.
are opinion. Then, as you said, people are there who believe very.
So shall I do stop share?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So there are people like me who believe in guidelines, but of course, we use our own discretion also, as you said. So now the house is open for discussion, comments, questions.
Can I say something, Dr.
Yeah,
Pandya?
Yes, absolutely.
Sure, Dr. Shukla.
So about guidelines, Procter and Gamble had a lot of cotton seeds because they are like in the pig industry, right? Fat industry.
Yes.
So they wanted to do something with that. So they gave $1.75 million to American Heart Association for research.
Yes, I know.
And, and then American Heart Association. So when you follow guidelines, it is very difficult to break a dogma. You know, the guy who first said that wash your hands before surgery died in an asylum at a very young age. He was not even in 40s or something. So whoever sees the light first has to suffer and be ridiculed. But the evidence is so clear, and I thank you, Bharat. I'll let other people talk. But about Ansel Keys, I was in the pain clinic. I served in pain clinic for 13 years. There was one Dr. Portnoy. He was in Sloan Kettering Center. So he thought, when he saw that opioids are helping cancer pain, he railroaded everybody and said it should be used for skeletal-muscular pain.
Yes.
So America is the only country that started using opioid, and he has killed thousands and thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah. Yes.
And as an addiction psychiatrist, I had such a hard time taking people off opioid. And whoever I took off opioid, chronic pain went away because opioid caused central sensitization. But now to change the dogma, it is so hard that I was threatened. It is very difficult. So individually, charity begins at home. So I was wondering and thinking that if individual person studies without any preconceptions, and they will also see this light. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sukla, for those comments. Yeah. Anybody else wants to chip in?
Yes, I have something. Bharat, you quoted the Seventh Day Adventist people, but they are one
Yes,
of the blue zones in Loma Linda. All of them are Seventh Day Adventists, and they have longevity.
they're what? Sorry, they
They
live
live,
long.
yeah, more of those people live beyond 100 years of age.
Yeah, yeah. So I
Loma
mean,
Linda is full of Seventh Day Adventists, and it is one of the blue zones.
exactly. But as I said, right? So when you study population, right, and you only pick one, okay, oh, they live long. Why did they live long? Is this because they were vegetarian, or there were other factors, right?
Right.
So so like if you look at it, then you compare if Maasai's eat 60% of the diet, 70 is totally meat and blood and milk, right?
Right.
And the Western price, when he went, he studied them, actually meticulous studies, right? His studies was like, if a whole book is about, and there were no coronary, there were very little cancer, very few disease, and they live long. So what I'm saying is, in nutrition and medicine, when you have all these little bits of study here or correlation here and this, so it kind of compounds. But we just have to look at the, I guess, a totality of evidence and kind of questions,
I have been to Masai Mara village, and it is worse than the worst village in India. And how can you have no health care? How can you know when a person dies whether he died from a heart attack or from infectious disease? And most of those people don't live long enough to die from a coronary disease.
No,
Saving
so
people from coronary disease is the reason cancer has gone up. Another point is this atherosclerosis is multifactorial. What may
right,
start the process, somebody ends it up. What I'm saying is that inflammation may start the process, but when the lipids enter the
right,
into the picture,
right,
then they escalate the whole thing. And so it is not a good thing to poo-poo LDL all the time. I have seen 70, 80-year-old ladies with high HDL of 90, 100, 150 have carotid disease. So not all HDL is protective either.
right. And as I was mentioning, that there is also HDL2 and 3. So I think
Right.
the thing is, the LDL or whatever, once they are oxidized or whatever, they're small, dense, atherogenic particles. And it's very, I guess, it's difficult to kind of, so total LDL is difficult to correlate, right? So you have to kind of fractionate and a lot of different things. So
Right.
my
Right.
argument is not that you don't worry about LDL, but I said you focus on the, and I have noticed even in my practice, since I went back since December, right? I have seen now a lot of patients, their lipid profile is excellent, right? Their sugar is just like 90, 95, A1C is like 6 or something like that. And still they have like coronaries and blockages. I said, what the heck is going on? So in short time and by literature, the insulin resistant metabolic dysfunction is one of the, so LDL, if it is one, metabolic dysfunction is probably 10 times more important, something like that. That's what my feeling is. So
Right, but
we need to
also
focus on
along
that.
with the increase in the consumption of seed oil, what has also gone up is the pollution in the air
Yeah,
since
yes,
those days.
yes,
Ability to exercise. People are more dependent on the motorbike, cycle,
yes,
motorcycle, car, and etc. They walk little. Look at the Masai Mara people. They have to walk wherever they go.
yeah,
Look at the Aegean people in Italy and other places. They all walk a lot. They live in the mountains. So then they breathe pure air. You come down to any major city, go to New Delhi, the worst pollution in the
right,
world. So all those things have also gone up. exercise, pollution,
Yes.
all those things start inflammation. So you cannot just put it down to seed oils. It is also going up, but also the polyunsaturated fat, processed food, our lifestyle has changed. All those are also factors in promoting heart disease.
I totally agree. There's a lot of things we don't even know, right? The chemicals and
Yes.
toxins. But in vegetable oils, whatever happened was, even in case in India, I look at it, right? Because when we grew up, right, I was from small town, and there was almost very rarely people will have a coronary disease. I mean, not coronary, but the people didn't have bypass surgeries and stuff like that in small villages in those days. And now I go, every other person, oh my God, this guy has bypass, this guy, this is a young kid die from it. So why? And so I said, what's going on, right? We were eating carbohydrates, we were eating all those things. But I remember now distinctly that because of the financial or whatever thing, we could not afford oil. They were like only time we would have this fried food was like in Diwali and stuff like that. Now India is flooded with this, whole world is flooded with soybean oil and coconut. Even I think Modi also, somebody that mentioned that we need to reduce dependence on the oil, but it's difficult because everywhere, all the processed food, all the packaged food, they're everywhere. If you go eat at a restaurant, you will have that because they are cheap. So, and some of the, I didn't have all the details on the seed oil because this was not like topic, because this was like a broad, so I didn't have, but one of the guy, he has done even the Japan and everything, right? Japan used to be very healthy before. They were
Yeah,
eating rice.
Okinawa people are in the blue zone.
Yeah. But then what happened is, as soon as their seed oil consumption went up, like Japanese nowadays, obesity is, and diabetes is
Yeah, as
getting
soon as the
pretty bad.
McDonald's and Burger Kings came down, they went up. It's crazy.
So, but something we have to kind of evaluate and constantly, and the things that will change. Who knows, right? Something else will come up. But
But
thank
Kiran,
you.
I
Yes.
know many people because I am doing it for 12 years, and
Right.
those people who change their lifestyle, all other like factors like pollution and exercise, and nearly they were the same.
Right.
But few lifestyle changes and all their inflammatory markers have come down. They are doing better. Many people are off diabetic, blood pressure, thyroid medications. So there is there is a great science behind this. Just if you try for a month, you will see how much difference it makes in your life.
You
Oh,
should do
absolutely. I
some
know.
case studies and stuff like that,
I
I'm
know.
thinking about it. I might do that.
I know personally. My own father. He had his first MI at age 42, and on November 4th, he's going to be 100 years old. He had his bypass surgery when he was 58. He's on statin. The only thing different that he has done meticulously is restrict the calories. You don't have to go on a long-term fasting, but you restrict the calories. That is the most important thing, along with balanced diet.
So thank you, friends.
Thank you.
It's already 9 o'clock here, so time is up. And thank
Yes.
you, Dr. Bharat Desai, for a very informative talk, thought-provoking talk. And as you
Yes.
said, you have provided enough ammunition for us to keep
Think
debating
about it.
the subject.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Kiran, Dr. Shukla, and others for joining in the meeting and enlightening us with your thought processes. So I request all American friends to keep in touch with Saturday Club of Baroda. If Chintu Shukla can give me some context, I will add all of them to Saturday Club WhatsApp group so that they can know what the next talk going to be. And you are all invited to attend these talks and keep contributing to discussion. And I also request you to suggest some good speakers, for us to have them as our guest speakers. So thank you all. Thank you all. We end the session here. Bharat, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Dr. Pandya, and thanks
Great
everybody.
talk,
Good
Bharat.
night.
Great talk. Thank you, Sadish.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Good morning. Yes. Good night.
Thank you, Bharat.